All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Exploring Legal Futures webinars. It's so nice to see so many of you today come and join us. We're very excited to speak to you about vacation schemes and internships and training contracts today. So my name is Maria, and I'm the Outreach, Widening Participation and Communications Coordinator here at the Faculty of Law. And I've got a few guests here with me. We're very excited to have them with us from Slaughter and May, and I will let them introduce themselves in a second. But a bit of housekeeping before they do that. This webinar is being recorded and we will be uploading it to our YouTube channel somewhere this week. So you'll be able to watch it back if you want. We will have a panel discussion. So this will not be a presentation. We will be discussing with our panelists, asking them questions and hearing their views. But we will be having a section at the end with pre-submitted questions and then live questions as well. So if you've got any questions as we're talking, please do put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. But I think this should be everything from me for now. If I can hand it first to Kevin to introduce himself, and then maybe after Kevin, we can have Summer and Therese. So tell us a little bit about who you are, what your role is, and maybe how you got there as well.
Yeah. Afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Howells, although everyone calls me Kev at work, and Tyrese and Summer probably will do as well. I went to a state school. I went on to read law at Cambridge University. I did a vacation scheme and a training contract at Slaughter and May, and I am now a partner in our financing team. So that's big corporates and other kinds of institutions who want to borrow huge amounts of money with lots of zeros on. I help them with that from a legal perspective. And just in terms of my current role, I think what I can bring to this in particular is I do a lot of CV review at the moment for both our vacation schemes and our training contracts, and I do a lot of interviews for vacation schemes and training contract. So I can hopefully give you a live show of what we consider in that aspect. And then finally, I'll just say my pronouns are he, him. And if there's anyone visually impaired that's joining, I'm wearing a red tie. I have messy curly hair. I'm in the office at Slaughter and May.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kevin. What about you, Summer?
Hi, everyone. I'm Summer. I'm a current trainee at Slaughter and May. I started my fourth seat today, actually. So in the last 6-month rotation of my training contract, previously done seats in corporate, financing, tax, and disputes. My background, I'm state school educated. My university experience is not as conventional as others in that I studied my law degree. It was online and it was a distance course through the University of Law. And I did that part-time for 4 years while working full-time in the civil service in the Cabinet Office. I was also part of the first cohort of trainees joining Slaughter and May to study the SQE. So perhaps we can touch on that a bit throughout the session and share experiences on that too. And also, relatively recently went through the training contract application process. So I can touch on that briefly too.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. What about you, Therese?
Hi, everyone. I'm Tyrese. I'm a second seat trainee. I also just started in my second seat in competition, and my first seat was corporate. I also studied at a state school as well, and I studied law at the University of Nottingham, and then went on to do the SQE, which I finished in August of last year. So I did a vacation scheme and a training contract interview with the firm. So hopefully I can bring some tips and tricks and things like that in terms of the process and what that looks like.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. So we've got a real range of people here that can give us a lot of experiences, both from the side of the assessor and the interviewee or the applicant. But before we start talking about internships, can I also ask Kevin, can you tell us a little bit more about the work Slaughter and May does in particular? Because obviously that's where you're all based. And I think it'd be lovely to hear a little bit more about what you do as a firm.
Yeah, so Slaughter and May is a full service law firm. So that is a law firm where we provide all of the legal advice that our big corporate clients would need. So that ranges from everything from, you've heard us talk about competition with Tyrese at the moment, to financing. So effectively, if you think about it in terms of the big companies that you hear about every day, the household names, the big brands, they will need legal advice and legal inputs on everything ranging from their strategy to their employment matters to raising money. And we, Slaughter and May, provide that legal advice on all the various fronts. We're also part of what people often call the magic circle, which means we're one of the say biggest or most successful UK firms So legal firms with a UK footprint.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's move on now to talking about the meaty part of the session, starting with internships. So if I kind of throw it at the panel to tell us a little bit more about what a legal internship actually includes, when do they usually take place? What are the advantages to doing an internship? Because I think that might be something that people might not be as familiar with as perhaps vacation schemes and training contracts.
So I think to start with, it's worth saying that there isn't a very clear terminology sometimes around internships. I think traditionally an internship used to be a longer placement, and in other areas, so outside the legal industry, an internship can be a much longer placement compared to a vacation scheme, which we'll go on to talk about. However, sometimes people can use internship to mean experience in an in-house role. So a vacation scheme, which we'll talk about shortly, means effectively work experience or a time in the building learning about how a law firm operates. And that's what law firms offer in terms of that work experience, in terms of getting access. Internships can, as I say, it's used a bit interchangeably, but can be used to give you the equivalent of an in-house experience. Now, in-house for this purpose means, as mentioned earlier, some of the big companies hire Slaughter and May to provide them legal advice, but they also have legal teams that work internally at those companies themselves. And those in-house teams can have their own solicitors, have their own lawyers working internally, and they often provide internships, which give you an insight into what an in-house company does, as opposed to what a private practice lawyer such as the three of us do.
Brilliant. And how can somebody kind of go about finding internship opportunities? Do you look online? Do you contact people? What's the best way to find out about them?
Yeah. So internships are relatively few. In the sense that VAC schemes are offered by most or all of the big UK law firms. Internships are normally the big UK corporates. You do have to do quite a lot of research to lay your hands on them. But equally, attending fair, like there are lots of law fairs and things like that, which universities, including University of Cambridge, arrange, and they do participate in those. Equally, job posting boards and word of mouth is a very good way to hear about those. But internships are a rarer thing than their vacation scheme.
So what is a vacation scheme then? What does it include and when does it take place?
So vacation schemes, as mentioned earlier, they are real life practical experience in a building, in a law firm sitting in the building. So what it entails is for either 1 week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, you would come in and you would live the life effectively as a trainee. So you would have lots of talks and people explain various bits of what life is like as a practicing lawyer. But actually the most exciting bit in many ways is you get to take the role of a trainee. You will share an office with a supervisor. You will do the kind of tasks that a trainee would be exposed to. And in that sense, you get a real hands-on experience of, do I like this career? Is this something I want to do? Is this something I'm good at? And really, it provides just a really helpful way of you getting to grips with and understanding, is this really the career for me?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And in terms of when they offer, I mean, it varies. The big firms have different ones, but our schemes, we have 2 each year. We have a 3-week scheme, which is for people in their penultimate year of university, so their last but 1 year of university. And that is held in summer. So that's 3 weeks during summer where you would come in and live the life as a trainee. We also do an extra scheme, which is 1 week, which is called the Spring Forward scheme. And that's for people from certain disadvantaged backgrounds. And that's 1 week in spring. And that's just meant to give kind of a shorter but still really important insight into firms.
Wonderful. So if I could actually throw it to someone who has done a vacation scheme, also to give Kevin a second to breathe, have some water. Therese, do you want to talk about maybe a little bit your experience? If you found it useful, what you thought was, the biggest advantages of doing a vacation scheme. So a little bit, about your journey doing a vacation scheme, maybe.
Yeah, of course. I'd say that I did the vacation scheme for 3 weeks in the summer, as Kev touched on as well. And I would add as well that they're normally paid as well. So you do normally get paid to do a vacation scheme. But in terms of kind of what you do, I think it's helpful to see every day what a trainee life will be like. And it's probably going to be your first instance of kind of coming into the office, coming into a law firm and actually getting hands-on experience with the type of work that you're probably going to be doing. So some tasks that I received was kind of doing research into certain areas of law or taking a look at some of the recent deals that we was looking at. And I think that really helps to feed in, especially if you're trying to go for a training contract interview. You've got those real tangible experiences you can bring to the interview to kind of show your enthusiasm. But then equally, if you decide to apply elsewhere, it's also a really good experience to have. And I would say it kind of mirrors, as Kev said, the life of a trainee for those couple of weeks. You kind of get that hands-on experience that you wouldn't necessarily get if you wasn't able to do a vacation scheme. But equally, there's loads of opportunities as well to kind of get similar experiences if you're unable to do so as well. So just a really useful tool, I think, to get to know a firm really, really well, and in terms of not only the work, but also the culture and the people you're going to be working with, which is incredibly helpful in determining where you'd like to work. And then also kind of getting, as I say, the kind of real experience behind you, which is super helpful to have.
Amazing, yeah. So you kind of mentioned that you get to know the firm quite a lot and you get to know the work of the firm. So does it really matter what firm you do your vacation scheme at? So if you decide that, perhaps the firm is not for you itself, but the work is, does it really matter? Is it a disadvantage if you end up applying to a different firm than the one you do your vacation scheme at?
I definitely don't think so. I think it's very helpful, as I say, because it's a good way to show up to your training contract interview with kind of the real experiences you've had in the firm. But equally, you can kind of use the experience that you've had in other applications as well. But I would say it's quite helpful if you have a particular firm in mind to apply for the vacation scheme. As normally as well, if you don't receive the vacation scheme, you can still apply for it directly for a training contract. So I wouldn't say there's any loss in applying either way.
Mm-hmm. And Summer, did you say that you didn't do a vacation scheme? Is that right? Or did I imagine that?
Okay, so I didn't do a vacation scheme. And I don't feel that I was particularly disadvantaged in any way. My circumstances were slightly different in that because I was working full time and studying part time, I don't think I would have also been able to fit a vacation scheme into my life at that point. But I think just the point to make quickly is that completing or taking part in a vacation scheme, it's not a prerequisite to a training contract. And as Tyrese has touched upon, completing a vacation scheme is a very useful way of demonstrating your motivations to study law. But there are other ways that you can go about doing that. To confuse the terminology from Kev's explanation of internships, there are also what's called virtual internships, but that's actually a virtual equivalent to a training contract. So just to confuse it further. But if there's plenty of content and material available online to run by quite big law firms. I think Slaughter & May has one as well. So you can take part in the equivalent of a virtual training contract. And that's also another way to get some experience and understanding of what your role would be. And I find that is a lot more flexible. You could do an hour of that here and there to fit around, whatever else you've got going on in your life, rather than having to commit 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of answers the question a lot of people have about, can I become a solicitor later in life? Can I qualify later in life? Or do I have to do it kind of straight out of uni? So I think that's a really good response to that. A really positive response. But yeah, you absolutely can't. And we can have some professional experience first. And that's okay and that's useful. So how competitive are vacation schemes? So how many, people would you have to go against if you want to do a vacation scheme? Are they really competitive? Are they not? I imagine I know the answer to this, but I'll pass it on to Kevin to give a more professional answer.
Well, so the honest answer is they're incredibly competitive. I would say I wouldn't characterize it as competitive necessarily, in the sense that every year we have hundreds and hundreds of applications, and we are restricted physically by how many desks we have available as to how many people we can offer. So that every year there are lots of people who are absolutely good enough to come on the scheme, and we absolutely want to see for a full training contract interview, but we literally don't have space for them. So the answer to your question is they are very hard to get hold of. They are massively oversubscribed. But equally, as Tyrese was saying earlier, there's very little harm in applying. And if you don't get a place, it's not a knockback at all. It just means, as Summer was saying, you have to answer the question of how do you know you want to work here in a slightly different way, but it shouldn't be viewed as a rejection.
That's really positive. Thank you for the encouraging tone. Okay, so that actually segue in talking about applying to a training contract, but also applying to a vacation scheme, because I imagine there's quite a lot of common points there. So since we're moving to training contracts, can I ask Kevin again? Sorry, Kevin, I know you're speaking quite a lot today. To tell us a little bit about how you actually qualify as a solicitor, particularly because the system has changed recently as well. So it might be different to what people are aware in the audience.
Yeah. So I'm going to bounce this to Tyrese in a second for the SQE, because I actually framed it in a different way. But you effectively you have there are two routes in. There is the traditional route where you obtain a degree from a university. Doesn't matter what that degree is in. It doesn't have to be law. You then go through a process which is called the SQE, which Tyrese will talk about because he's much more knowledgeable, having recently done them than I am. And once you have done that, you join the firm for a 2-year period known as a training contract. Now, a training contract is what it sounds like. You are being trained by professional lawyers. So in our case, you would literally share an office with me. You would be my trainee for 6 months at least. And I would help you and show you the ropes on how to act as a lawyer. Now, during that time, you are training, but it is also a fully paid and a well-paid career. So you are contributing, you are working, but everyone acknowledges and appreciates that you are still in training and you're not yet a fully qualified solicitor. You can give advice in their own right. The second route in is more new, which is solicitor apprentices. And that is effectively an alternative longer path in which doesn't require a degree. So in our case, that is a 6-year program that you start while your compatriots might be going to university. You can start as an apprentice instead. It is a longer program, but gets you to the same place of becoming a qualified solicitor at the end of it, and therefore able to give legal advice in your own name. Tyrese, do you mind talking about the SQE?
Yeah, of course. So in terms of the SQE, it's split up into 2 sections. So you have SQE1, which kind of touch on the substantive knowledge that you will need to know. So as Kev said as well, you don't have to study a law degree. So what you will typically do is do a conversion course, which is another year before you start the SQE. If you do a law degree, then you kind of jump straight onto the SQE. But essentially, SQE1 looks at the knowledge that you kind of need to obtain, or the regulatory body requires you to have, and you sit multiple choice exams, so slightly different to the old system. And then in SQE2, you kind of retain the knowledge you need, but you're looking at more practical skills, which I think are kind of applicable to the role of a solicitor. So, for example, client interviewing, doing advocacy, and then also doing like research notes and things like that. So it's kind of split between knowledge and skills. And that's normally split up. How we do it is within a year, but you kind of follow the regulatory guidelines and when you can sit the exams as well. And then after that, you then move on to your 2-year training contract as well.
How did you find the SQE, Therese? Was it a good experience? Did you feel like it was good preparation for being a solicitor?
Yeah, I think that especially looking at SQE2, it really helps you in terms of kind of the practical skills you're going to need on the job. So kind of making a note or doing some client research which are really, really helpful to have, and I think very applicable to the job itself. And then in terms of kind of the knowledge that you need as well, I think it does depend on which area of law that you go into, because they kind of have a standardized overview. So you might look at property law or criminal law and business law. So you kind of have to get quite a wide range of law under your belt as you're studying for the SQE. But then some areas will be more applicable depending on where you end up practicing in.
Brilliant. That all sounds great. And so let's think a little bit now about doing a training contract, being a trainee at a firm. And if I maybe kind of pass it to Summer now, can you talk us a little bit about what a typical day in your life looks like? What sort of tasks you get up to? Is it really stimulating? Do you get a lot of support? So lots of questions there.
I think, yeah, I mean, it's actually quite hard to describe a typical day as a trainee at Salter & May. And I think that that's perhaps unique to Salter & May in that we have a multi-specialist approach. So every day is so varied within one whole practice area. So the corporate team, for example, you could be working on any different type of corporate transaction. So in terms of the sort of matters that you might be working on, I would say that that's very hard to kind of describe in a typical way. In terms of the tasks, I have a lot of involvement with legal research and also drafting as well. That's something that I'm kind of trying to develop. And the good thing is that we have essentially a checklist that we have to fill out once a month with our what's called monitoring partners. And you tick off the various different skills. And what's really good is that actually is quite a useful mechanism for identifying areas like actual professional skills that you might not have had much experience with, that you can then turn around to your supervisor or your monitoring partner and say, actually, my typical day doesn't involve as much, for example, drafting. Can I perhaps get involved in something that would involve a bit more of that in order to develop your skills? And in terms of the support that's available, I would say that the environment is very, very supportive. And certainly towards the beginning of the training contract, I would say that my typical day would include at least one training session. The training I can see Kev laughing at me. The training program at Saltramate is very, very comprehensive. And at times the training program is almost like I would say half of a full-time job in itself in the first 6 months. There's less of it as you go on because you tend to tick it off. But just as an example, the training program, it covers almost, or if not all, of the practice areas of the firm. And then it also delves into each of the professional skills required in detail, as well as topical events and more relevant key topics. So,
how many hours of training would you do you reckon, per week when you first started?
oh, that's a good question. I would say maybe 5 to 6. There's a lot of, as well as in-person training sessions, there's also a lot of online calls, so virtual training sessions, but also we have a really great online training platform where all of our training sessions are recorded. So even if you don't have a training session coming up in your calendar, one that you've been invited to, you can probably find a version of it online saved onto our platform. So if you're, and this takes it back to the multi-specialist approach that I mentioned earlier, chances are that quite often you will be working on something that you've never worked on before. And the ability to go online to our online training platform and find some relevant training in that area is really, really useful, super valuable, especially being so new and junior.
Brilliant. That's excellent. Good to hear that you're not launched into the wall straight after university degree. Or what other professional pathway you followed. That's very positive. Okay, now before we talk about applying for a training contract, let's think a little bit about what happens at the end of a training contract as well, as a bit of a hopeful note for the future. Kevin, what happens when you finish your kind of 4 seats of your training contract?
So training contracts, they're slightly different in every firm because all training contracts need to have what we call a contentious seat. So there needs to be one seat where there is an element of arguing, essentially. So that's a dispute seat, what you might think of traditionally as a lawyer doing. It's not just disputes. There are various teams that can tick that box, but they have to do that. Otherwise, different firms have different training contract structures. So ours is based around moving around. You move through at least four different groups in the firm to have experience with those different groups. Other firms do it differently, but that's how we do it. You go through at least 4 different groups. And that's important for what happens at the end, because at the end, you then are you are choosing where you would like to spend the rest of your career. So at the end of your training contract, you effectively sit down, you have a chat with the partners in the relevant groups, you have a chat with our HR team, and there is an open dialogue about which group did you enjoy the most, which group do you think you would be most successful in on a long-term basis. You effectively go through that process, you find where you want to go, where there are slots available, and you choose in collaboration with the firm where you want to become a qualified lawyer. So at that point, I chose financing. So financing was my 4th seat on my training contract. I really enjoyed it, and therefore I said I'd like to go back and qualify into financing and be a financing lawyer. Fortunately enough, the financing group at the time said that they didn't object to me coming, or for them. And then what happens is I became a qualified solicitor. I'm able to give legal advice. I am at that point, a fully fledged solicitor, where I am a lawyer in my own name. And I stopped being a trainee. I become a qualified lawyer, and I have been in the financing group ever since. So after that point, there is less ability to move around different practice areas. It's not completely unheard of, but you are more fixed in one practice group. But that is one of the benefits of the training contract, is compared to a lot of other jobs, you get to experience lots of different areas before you have to make a final choice.
Brilliant. Great. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so let's think a little bit about now applying for training contracts, applying for vacation schemes. Starting off thinking a little bit about what are the key skills that are you looking for people when they're applying to vacation schemes? And I know that internships might be similar, but vacation schemes and training contracts, what skills does somebody have to demonstrate to show that they are a fit for this job?
I appreciate you all had to listen to me a lot, but I'll handle this one, then Sam and Tyrese can grow in. But effectively, the honest answer is there are kind of 4 broad categories that we assess people by. So the first one is intellect. Now, that is where your grades will become very important. So it's, how have they performed at school? How have they performed at A-levels or their equivalent? How have they performed at university? But it also goes beyond that. And in an interview context, it's things like, are they able to express a position clearly? Are they able to engage in a challenging conversation, hold their own position, and be relatively robust and think on their feet? The second category is drive, and that's where the vacation scheme element is so important. So by drive, we mean, is this person really driven? Do they really want to be a lawyer? Do they really want to be a lawyer at Slaughter and May? Now, that is slightly different. I know you're asking about vacation schemes, and that part of the reason people do vacation schemes is to assess those questions. So it is, you don't have to have all of the answers at that point, but we do still want to know that someone who's taking a spot on a vacation scheme has at least they have thought it through, they've done the basic research, and they have some idea, yes, I want to be a lawyer, or yes, I might want to be a lawyer, and yes, Slaughter and May might be somewhere I want to work. So still having that element of drive, even if they've not made their final decision. The third category we consider is resilience. So, the honest answer is, and I won't look at Summer or Tyrese when I say this, but it can be a very demanding job. I think it's a very rewarding job, but it can be a very demanding and challenging job. And we want to know that you would be able to thrive in that environment under, there can be long hours, there can be stressful situations where you're making big judgments, and you have to be able to kind of push on and be resilient. And the ways to demonstrate that are things like where you've overcome disappointment, where there's been a really challenging environment and you've pushed through and you succeeded, showing us that you're going to be resilient under pressure. And the fourth and final category is probably the most straightforward. Is just having some personality. So interpersonal skills. So at the end of the day, a trainee is going to come and sit in an office with a supervisor. And what is always in the back of my mind when I'm doing interviews for training contracts or for vacation schemes is this person could come and share an office with me for 1 or 3 weeks as a vacation scheme student or 6 months as a trainee. So I want to get on with that person. I want them to have a bit of personality. And be able to also deal with clients and deal with other people at the firm in a kind of friendly and professional way. Terry, Summer, any of that unfair?
I'd say that's a pretty fair representation. The point you made, I think you touched briefly on resilience and showing that you've overcome adversity. And actually, that made me think of, during my training contract interview with Slaughter and May, one of the questions that I got that kind of really threw me off was and also touching on intellect. It was, they'd looked through my scores in some of my modules in my law degree and said, oh, why didn't you perform as well in this module? And I think that question, that's probably one of their best mechanisms for one, kind of discussing intellect, discussing drive, because that's the sort of thing that you could come up with your answer, but also showing how you can think on your feet and adapt. So I just thought I'd throw that out there as something to think about as a potential question and a way in which those 4 different points that Kevin raised could be assessed.
No, actually, that's a really good example. So I actually wanted to ask about, education is one thing, but in terms of how can you show those skills through the kind of other supercurricular, extracurricular things you're doing? So maybe Therese first and then Summer. Can you talk us a little bit about, what kind of evidence did you use? What kind of things did you do to maybe learn more about the profession, but also prepare for your application and build those skills? Did you do networking? Did you do summer schools? Did you also you did a vacation scheme? But what other things did you do that you found helpful?
Yeah, I think the main thing to take away is that kind of no experience is bad experience. Even if it's kind of not related to law, I think it's really important to kind of take quite a wide approach with what you're going to put down in terms of kind of if you work a part-time job, that's super, super valuable. Even if it's not kind of connected to law or working in a law firm, you'll pick up skills, for example, like commercial points. You might be able to look at a business that you work for and how that works. And those things are also really, really valuable. So I would say don't shoebox yourself, I think, solely to legal experience, because I think, as we've all touched on as well, you may not always have the time to be able to go to do loads of extracurriculars if you're working a part-time job at university and things like that. So it's quite important to kind of stretch your examples where you can. So, for example, I put down my part-time job that I did, and I kind of spoke about how it helps me develop kind of an understanding of the business itself, but also working in a team, which is a really, really big part of the job that we do. Being able to communicate, I think, kind of don't underestimate the importance of interpersonal skills and actually being able to work in a team and get on with everyone that you kind of work with. That's super important as well. And then also, I think attending kind of any event that you can. So if there's kind of a recruitment event by a law firm, you should try and go network with individuals and kind of get some exposure. I think, again, a lot of the firms put on, I know that we do, but we put on kind of a lot of events all around the country that trainees go to as well. And it's a really, really good opportunity to speak to people that are kind of not too far removed from university as well, or the position of kind of applying for training contracts or vacation schemes, and kind of getting some of that information from them as well, which I think is super helpful.
Yeah. I think I know we've got quite a few students, like current university students here with us, and I would definitely say law societies. Like a lot of universities have law societies you can engage with, and they can be a really good first point of contact because they sort of do the work for you in a way. They tell you where the fairs are, they tell you what the firms are organizing. I know Cambridge specifically has now instituted a non-law into law society, which I think is fantastic. So it's for people that did not study law at university and want to do law, and they've been really, really helpful as well for people that have just been a bit lost. So yeah, definitely think if you are a current university student, there's a lot of opportunities from law societies that you can engage with, basically. But what about you, Summer? Did you kind of do similar things? Did you mention similar things, or did you had a bit of a different trajectory as well? So how did you kind of use that to your advantage?
Yeah, I mean, to echo Therese's point, no experience is a bad experience. And so, yeah, my journey was not as conventional as others. I'd been a civil servant for 4 years by the time I was applying for training contracts. So I had plenty of professional experience to talk about. But in fact, I spent just as much time talking about the job I had in a shop when I was 17. And that really drives the point that in anything you do, any extracurriculars or employment, there will always be aspects that you can kind of speak to demonstrate your understanding of what the role of a lawyer would entail, or kind of the skills that you've developed. I think one thing to remember is that the legal industry it's ultimately a service industry. We might not be selling products in a shop, but we are ultimately selling our services. And there's a huge element of customer service to that, which it comes through client interactions and whatnot. And then I think in terms of networking, I think that the network opportunities, they are very, very valuable, and the formal ones are great. So attend as many events as you can, but also the informal networking opportunities. If you come across someone and you think, oh, their journey sounds a little bit interesting, or oh, it sounds like they've had a similar experience to me, then I think that's a good way of reaching out to someone and having an organic conversation. I think that's not to say send a blanket message out to 50 people on LinkedIn. It's kind of try to have an organic conversation about it. And then just touching on events, I think that there are a lot of events across the country, but I'm aware that, sometimes they're not always the most accessible for people. But there are also a lot of online events. So it's just to make the point that I attended an online event. This was a while ago now, and found it really interesting. Someone was speaking who was a corporate associate at Salter at the time, that she was saying that she was previously a nurse before retraining as a lawyer. And I thought, I mean, I'm not a nurse. I was a civil servant. I thought that's an interesting experience. How about I message her on LinkedIn and ask about how she kind of pivoted her career? And that was really, and she gave me some really great advice, and it was personal, and it was managing to build a connection through that.
Yeah, so that kind of organic communication with people is really, really positive, I would say, definitely.
Yeah. Sorry, can I say one other thing that I probably mentioned earlier, but one of the other categories that I think gets confused a lot, or confuses people a lot, and certainly confused me a lot, is commercial awareness. So commercial awareness is this phrase that gets thrown around a lot in applications for vacation scheme and training contracts, and it's never completely clear what commercial awareness means. But so I think a lot of for vacation schemes, but particularly for training contracts, a lot of law firms would expect you to show and exhibit commercial awareness. And really what that is a kind of an interest and an awareness of what is going on in the commercial or the corporate world. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be an expert in all matters. And at a place like Slaughter May, the way we view it is, when you come to Slaughter May, we will give you all the tools you need to succeed. But what we do need people to bring is an interest in the commercial world. As I said earlier, the job can be very demanding. It can be, you can work late, you can work hard, it can be big stressful jobs. So you can be making a judgment call on something with transaction that is worth billions, and that could put a lot of pressure on you. But the reason it is a fun job and the reason it is an enjoyable job is because it is genuinely interesting. And most of us thrive knowing that our deals might be on the front page of the Financial Times or be something that people are reading about and talking about on the news. So when people say commercial awareness, what I would say it means is just kind of watching what's going on in the corporate world and finding it interesting, or keeping a loose track. So you're not just reading the news about what the latest, what Taylor Swift is doing, etc. You're also clicking on the business articles and you find that interesting. And you're not just reading the political news and understanding and thinking, wow, look at everything that Trump is doing. But you're thinking, well, and what does this mean for the UK economy and stuff like that? So you don't have to be an expert. And actually, one of the best examples I've ever seen of commercial awareness was someone had said to me, and this links to Summer's point earlier, the reason I started becoming interested in law in the first place was I worked in Cineworld on the weekends, and I was a cinema attendant. And I noticed before COVID that they were struggling with ticket sales. And then I worked there during COVID and noticed nobody went. And I started thinking about, gosh, what are the implications of that for the business? And that must be a really difficult thing. And then I started just to read the articles in the news about Cineworld, this big cinema chain, and just kept track of what was happening for this company I was working for. And that's excellent commercial awareness and excellent commercial interest. And I think to me, that's all it means. You don't need to be an expert. You need to be interested in the corporate world, because that's what makes it an interesting job.
Yeah, that's very useful, I think, because I definitely see the term commercial awareness being thrown around quite a lot. As a non-lawyer myself, I think it's something that perhaps can seem a little bit of a mystery, like what is commercial awareness? So I think it's really useful that you brought it up, Kevin, absolutely. So you mentioned kind of resilience and commercial awareness, obviously, and all of that. So is there one type of person you're looking for? Is there one ideal lawyer? Or can you sort of have different attributes? Do you have to have attended a Russell Group University, for instance? And I say that specifically because we get quite a lot of questions about it. What does a typical lawyer look like, if there is a typical lawyer? And I'm kind of throwing it out to everybody who wants to touch on it.
So I can start because no one else clicked off mute, but the answer is really straightforward. No, it just doesn't matter how you come to it. Ultimately, when I am doing interviews, I want to know that the people I am working with are the best people, because that makes my job easier. It makes my clients happier, it makes more money for the firm, and it makes the day more interesting. So you absolutely don't have to have gone to a Russell Group University. We've got great examples of that here. You don't have to have done law, you don't have to have done a certain kind of work experience. You just have to show, they're all different routes to the same thing, of you have to show you genuinely want to do the career, you're genuinely interested in the career, and that you've got those attributes I talked about. So intellect, drive, resilience, and interpersonal skills and commercial awareness. And however you can prove that, great. There's no specific boxes to tick.
I think just to add on and build on to Kev's point, I think I was quite pleasantly surprised when I joined Slaughter May. I was really quite worried that there perhaps is an ideal type of person that's given a training contract and is successful in law, but that's really been proved wrong to me. We have such a diverse workforce and so many different people from different walks of life. So I would just say that it's not like a one-size-fits-all approach. I think different people bring different skills and attributes and characteristics, and as long as they kind of map onto the 5 key points that Kev has mentioned, being different in some other way wouldn't be prohibitive.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's not one perfect lawyer. And for anybody watching this, if you are interested, it's just worth following that interest, doing the things all the panelists have suggested, and seeing if it is for you. If you're thinking that you have to have gone to Cambridge, you have to have gone to the certain school, done, a specific vocation scheme, that's just not true. And hopefully by all of these webinars and all those wonderful panelists we've had, Kevin, Summer, Therese, but all of the other panelists as well that you've hopefully seen in our previous webinars, you can tell that there's just a wide variety of people. And the next webinar, bit of self-promo on the webinars here, is all about doing law without having done a law degree. And you'll be able to hear about people that have had really quite diverse backgrounds, but no spoilers. Do go and sign up for that. But back to sort of training contracts. Just another 2 questions before I open it up to questions from the audience, because I know we're getting quite a few. One of them is, if maybe you can talk a little bit more about the kind of nitty-gritty of the application process. What does it actually include? Does it include an interview? What kind of sort of documents do you have to submit? Just because I know we've got a question about that as well. So it'd be interesting to hear.
Sure. So I think it's important to know that different law firms have different requirements. So I can speak to Slaughter and May's requirements, but I think the important thing is that whichever firm you're looking at, they will have a recruitment page. So you can just type in law firm and the name of the law firm and recruitment, and it will take you to the page, and they will explain in very clear detail what you need, because there are a range of things that we need. But in Slaughter and May terms, I would say it's pretty simple. I'll let Summer and Tyrese tell me if it's not simple or not in a moment. But effectively, for a vacation scheme, you're asked to provide you will fill in a form which has some basic details about you, including things like your grades, a bit about your background, but kind of all factual information. You're then encouraged to submit a CV, which is probably 1 or 2 pages, just the factual information, again, that kind of covers your grades, your work experience, and you submit a covering letter. So that is, again, I'm looking over that because I have a pile of them on my desk, but they are normally 1-page documents. And that is where you've dealt with the facts in your CV, but that kind of says, why do I want to be a lawyer? What do I want to get out of a vacation scheme? Or why do I think I will be good for a training contract, depending on what you're applying for? So you submit all of that on the system. In a vacation scheme context, I think you then primarily, there is a process of kind of narrowing it down, and then you go, those who are successful and through that process, based on covering letter and CV, have a virtual interview with a partner and an associate, or a partner and a senior counsel, and that is it. So I appreciate that's stressful because it's a video interview, but it's actually not a lot of process, and particularly people who have a CV already on the stocks. It doesn't take a huge amount of time to do the application process. The thing that takes the time is the research to make sure that you are putting into your covering letter genuine, good reasons, and you can talk well in an interview. Similarly, for a training contract, it's very similar. So you go online, you fill in a very substantially similar form, you send in your CV and your covering letter. You may then be invited to an in-person interview. So almost all of our interviews are in person, absent a few specific scenarios. You will turn up on the day and you're given a short written exercise to do. Now that's a 20-minute written exercise. It doesn't require any pre-knowledge at all. So again, you don't need to be a lawyer. You don't need to have any kind of legal background knowledge. But it's a written exercise where you're given some materials and you're basically asked to understand, comprehend, and produce something off the back of them. And then you will go into a 1-hour interview, or more or less 1 hour, where about half of that will just be talking about your CV, your covering letter, getting to know you. And the other half will be talking about an article that has been pulled from the day, or a recent article at least. And it's just really to get to know you. There's no more magic to it than that. There aren't set questions. There's not rehearsed questions. It is just to have a chat to get to know you and for us to make a judgment about whether you are genuinely ticking those boxes for the categories we talked about earlier and whether you would be a good fit for the firm. I think Summer, Tyrese, were your processes that straightforward, or am I exaggerating?
I see Tyrese take his mic off. You go.
Okay, I'll just say, yeah, it was exactly as Kev described in terms of kind of the process. And I think the one thing to note is, I think it's just taking the time to tailor your application to whichever firm you're applying to. I think it's really important, and it does come across when you kind of have done the research and you've actually taken the time to really think about the application process. And as I say, I think the cover letter in particular is not something that every firm does, but I think it's quite a good opportunity to really put why you think you want to work at a particular firm or why you would like to do a vacation scheme. And it's actually quite nice to be able to kind of decide what you want to put in, and it's really, really helpful in that sense to kind of have that opportunity to do so. That's all I really wanted to add.
Summer, do you agree?
Yeah, I do agree. The one other point that I was going to make, and Kev can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that we have, unless it's changed, we have like logical reasoning tests as part of the application process, like Watson Glaser. But it's just to flag that for some other law firms, that's quite a key part of the application process. So the tests vary. Some of them test your verbal reasoning. I think there's some that's slightly maths related. But it's just a flag that some other law firms do incorporate those sorts of tests into their application reviewing processes. So that's something to bear in mind. And it was just to add that the Watson-Glaser test to me was very scary because it's not something that I'd ever done before. And there were lots of resources available online. So I recommend having a look at those. I mean, if you do get invited to an interview and as part of it says there's a logical reasoning test or a Watson-Glaser test, don't leave that to the night before if that's not something that you've done before, because I think it's something that does require a little bit of practice.
Okay. Mila, kind of last question then, and then I'll move on to the live and pre-submitted questions. So we've got quite a few of them. What happens if you don't get a training contract on your first try? So, you do a round of applications and you're just not successful. Is that the end of the road? Or, again, kind of open to everybody who's interested in pitching in?
I mean, look, the honest answer is, so we talked about vacation schemes being competitive earlier. Training contracts are really competitive as well. So the honest answer is that a lot of people won't necessarily get that first job that they apply for, but there are lots of law firms. So I think most people will try, and no one should put too much stock on this number, but most people will do the research and narrow it down to kind of 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, firms for their first round. And that's important because, as Tyrese mentioned earlier, doing the research is really important. And it is much better to really think about which firms you might want to work for, do the research off the back of that, than sending in a generic application, which we will recognize as generic. And frankly, it means that you don't know really if you want to work there, and we will not know if you really want to work here. That means that if you are unsuccessful in that first 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, series of applications, there are hundreds more law firms, and you just need to do more research and understand, what other options are out there. Now, that obviously can be time consuming, and it can be disheartening not to get it. But I think actually the important thing to remember there is it's not just about ability. It's not just about, our sole criteria isn't who is the best. There is no objective best. What we are partly looking for as well is I say horses for courses. So what will you be the right fit? So if you get turned down for a training contract at the firm, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be an excellent lawyer. You might be a really fantastic lawyer, but you might be more suited for a different kind of law firm. So it's just a process of kind of going out there and looking and trying to find that law firm where you will find your fit and you will slot it. And to that end, as I say, it can be disheartening to be knocked back. But there's lots of places out there. I think most people who continue will eventually find the right fit for them, and they will go on to be excellent lawyers. Of course, some people do end up in never landing the right training contract, as is true with any job. And then ultimately, there are people that explore other options, but there are so many opportunities out there that actually, while it's competitive, if you go to an interview and you don't get a job, you learn a lot from it. You can seek the feedback from that interview and you can learn from that. And I think most people will eventually find, if you push and you are committed to it, you will find the right place for you in due course.
Brilliant. And what a fantastic way to end the panel section of the webinar and move on to questions. Okay, so let's think a little bit about some questions then. I know there's quite a few in the Q&A box, so please do put more if you have them. But I'll start with the pre-submitted one. And I think somebody has also asked about it live, which is not doing a law degree. Is it a disadvantage if somebody comes into law not having done a law degree?
No. It's as simple as that. I think so. Slightly more than half of our lawyers didn't do law at university, so it's something like 51%. The only difference is if you did law, it is possibly helpful to show that you are committed to being a lawyer because you studied law, but you just need to find another way to demonstrate you're committed to law. Otherwise, I don't think it has any impact whatsoever. And I think a good way of demonstrating that, and actually demonstrating there isn't one single mold, is that I know Summer pretty well. She sat in my group. We're in a social mobility committee together. I had to ask her what she studied at university and where she went to university before this webinar, because it's just not relevant. Like, it's just not taken into account once you're in the building.
Amazing. Summer, do you want to say something on that?
I was just going to say, obviously I did study law, and I think now looking back with hindsight and I think when I applied to study law, I was of the notion that perhaps studying law would make it easier to become a lawyer, or that I had to study law. But I think in hindsight, I perhaps would have chosen a different subject, knowing that it is possible to convert the degree and move into a legal career regardless. I perhaps would. I was thinking back to when I had a conversation with someone in corporate, and they studied psychology, and I was thinking, wow, that must come in really handy for this job. So in some respects, I always feel a bit jealous of people that have like this whole other degree of knowledge.
Yeah. And I think the important thing is to do a degree you genuinely will find interesting, because that is the one you will excel in. So I studied law as well, and actually I really enjoyed it. It's a fantastic degree, but I really enjoyed doing it and studying it for what it was, and not because it's been particularly helpful for my ultimate career. So if you want to go and study law, I think make sure it's something that you want to do because it is law, not because you think that is how you get the job at the end.
Absolutely. So my next question will be about international people. So can you apply to legal firms in the UK as an international student / applicant? Can you get sponsored as well? Because I imagine you would need to get sponsored in that case.
Yes. Yeah, it's fine. Again, so as an interviewer, I'm not even made aware of their whether you need a visa sponsorship, etc. for it. At least for us and for most other big firms, we have whole teams of people who deal with kind of visas and all that good stuff. International applicants, we have lots and lots of, and lots of our solicitors come from international backgrounds. Again, we're just looking for the best people, and it doesn't bother me where they're from.
Brilliant. Okay, so if I asked Therese now, what is your favorite thing about your job, and what is the one thing that you maybe do not like as much? You can be as honest or dishonest as you like.
I would say that my favorite thing is that genuinely no day is ever the same. In terms of, I think that especially with our multi-specialist approach, you don't really tend to do the same thing twice. And then in the same instance, I think that's also something that can be quite challenging at times as well, because you never really are in your comfort zone. So I think it requires a little bit extra resilience in terms of kind of being able to be more adaptable, and also kind of being genuinely enthusiastic, because I think it's something that does make us quite different to other law firms, and it's something that kind of I think you have to take into consideration when applying as well. But I think that keeps it interesting, but it's also challenging, so it's kind of a little bit of both.
An interesting question actually. Somebody's asking, can you choose the trainings, like during your training contract, can you choose the 4 seats you sit in? I thought it may at least.
I think we're all nodding. But yes, you choose where you would like to sit. The vast majority of the time, and Summer and Tyrese can comment, the vast majority of the time that works out perfectly. If so we have 45 trainees every 6 months. If all of them say that they want to do the same 4 seats, we will have to have an accommodation somewhere. But then you have a conversation. I got all of the seats that I wanted to do. Summer?
Yeah, I got all of the seats that I wanted to do, but I was going to echo your points about how some departments might be oversubscribed. Sometimes there is a bit of a negotiation with our early careers development team. You might be asked, okay, well, if you couldn't get to do a seat in this department, what would be your second best alternative? Or if we gave you your top choice, would you then be willing to go with your 4th choice for another seat? I think it does vary a lot from cohort to cohort, my understanding.
But that's not something that is true. That's not something I think you should worry about, because I knew when I was a trainee that I didn't want to do financing. Back then, sort of no longer true, but back then you had to do a financing seat. So I thought, God, I don't want to do financing, but I have to do it. And then it was by far my favorite seat, and I have stayed here, and now I'm a partner in financing. So until you get into a law firm, the whole point of a training contract is you see all the different groups. If you've got a preconception, then we will certainly accommodate it wherever we can. But actually, you might be wrong about where you want to end up, as I was.
Summer, I'll go back to Summer, trying to give everybody a breather. How did you choose law firm A? Why is law firm A amongst all of the other law firms?
I mean, there are lots of reasons, and actually there are lots of reasons why Slaughter May is very different to other law firms that actually made that decision quite easy. I've spoken about the multi-specialist approach, so I won't speak on that anymore as I'm conscious of time. But I really like the fact that, so we don't have a billable hours target. And that's not to say I like the fact that I don't have to work as hard, because we all do work very, very hard. I think that just fosters a much nicer working environment. Everyone is very, very open to talking to you and really sharing their time with you and being supportive. And also, I think the clients. So the clients that we have are household names, super, super interesting. And like Kev said earlier, everyone likes the idea of working on something that they're going to wake up and see on the Financial Times. And so I think the ability to work with really, really high profile clients, big multinational companies and big FTSE 100 companies, that's what it keeps the job interesting for me.
Wonderful. That sounds like a lot of fun, I have to say. I know you've all mentioned the word team quite a lot. So somebody is asking, how big is your team that you work with, like your immediate team? And does it differ when you're a trainee versus when you're an associate? Do you work a bit more on your own, I guess, the more you kind of, what am I trying to say? The more experienced you are, do you work on your own more, and do you work in a team in the beginning more heavily? I guess maybe, I don't know, who was it? Summer or Therese first, actually. Do you want to maybe talk about senior training, and then we can see what Kevin does in a kind of older part of his career?
Yeah,
Not-
I would say it's really, really varied. So some of our groups are really big, like financing, competition, corporate is split into 3 groups. So it does vary team to team, because our specialist teams are slightly smaller. But in terms of your kind of immediate team, I would say you tend to work with kind of the people that are doing the same project or matter as you. So they can kind of be slightly smaller teams that you can work with closely day to day. But then kind of in terms of the larger team, you have plenty of opportunity to kind of meet everyone at social or networking events, things like that. So you kind of you're able to get to know everyone quite well. But the actual size of the team will vary depending on where you sit and what department you're in. So it's not kind of one across the firm.
I think with very rare examples and only ever examples as a partner, you will never be working on your own. So as a trainee or as an associate, you will always be working with someone else. So you will always be in some form of a team. A bigger job requires a bigger team, but and a smaller job won't require a smaller team, but you will always have someone. And actually, Slaughter May, at least, even if someone's not on your team, I can go around, and if I need competition law help, I know Tyrese is in competition law, I can knock on his door and he will help me. So I think you always have plenty of support and plenty of people around you.
Very fun question from someone. And I actually combine 2 questions in one. One of them is, do you need language skills, or are they useful given you're a multinational corporation company? And then the other question linked to that is, does Slaughter and May do a lot of secondments abroad?
So you don't need language skills. I think the vast majority of our work is conducted in English, even if it's with international. So more than 70% of our work is international, but I'm lucky in the sense that most of it is conducted in English, because that's kind of just an international norm. Language skills are fantastic, because they show, you have to be very clever to speak a second language. So it's helpful from an intellect point, but also we have plenty of relationship firms across the country. We have clients that do speak different languages, so they can only be helpful, they're never a detriment. And then in terms of comments, I think Summer and Tyrese will both not have done as a comment at this stage, unless. But as trainees, we have a kind of a set list of international comments that the trainees can apply for. Not everybody goes. Not everybody wants to go. So I didn't want to put my hand up because I had just met my now wife. So I didn't want to go on an international comment. But there are a set list, and they range from ones in New York to Norway to various different countries. And there is a process you go through where we send around the list, people can apply for them. So there are certainly opportunities to go abroad as a trainee solicitor for those who want to seek it out.
Okay, so maybe as a last question then, and I'd throw it to everybody, so it'd be nice to hear a little bit from everyone. What would you suggest to someone who is maybe a little bit younger? Maybe they're only at 12, maybe they think about applying to university, but they are sort of considering the solicitor pathway. What would be your advice to them? I'll take you in order. I'll just do my screen. I'll do Kevin, and then Summer, and then Therese. Just make it easy for ourselves.
So the 2-part advice, I'm going to cheat, Murray, but I think my 2 points are: do your research and understand what is actually involved. And then if you decide that you want to go for it, go for it. And don't prejudge. Don't decide that you don't fit the mold, or don't self-select out and think, this isn't for me, this is going to be too hard, I can't do it. If you've done your research and you think you would be good at it and you want to do it, you need to back yourself and go out after it. Because it's that tenacity that will get you there. And you should never self-select out and decide that, prejudge yourself. We just want the best people. That's what it comes down to. The best people, the best lawyers. And if you are going to be one of those people, I don't care about your background or anything like that. I just want you to come.
I can go next. I would say if you're dead set becoming a lawyer, great. Have a look at the different routes that are available, particularly if you are a year 12 student. I'd really recommend looking into the solicitor apprenticeship program, not just the solicitor MA program, but lots of law firms are rolling out solicitor apprenticeships now. And just as someone that worked full time and studied part time, I kind of created a mini solicitor apprenticeship for myself. And I would just say that it's a really valuable way of learning and earning, essentially. So you get paid a full-time job while doing it. But yeah, just to say there are lots of different routes into becoming a lawyer, and have a look and do research on that, as well as researching the law more generally.
And Therese?
Yeah, I would just say I think it's important to kind of, as Kevin said, just really back yourself. And I think that one thing to remember, whether you kind of apply in year 12 or at university, is that you're applying to be a trainee. And I think it's quite easy sometimes to try to want to be the final product. And I think the whole point of the training contract is to kind of learn and pick up tools that you need to be a solicitor. So I think even if you don't necessarily feel completely equipped yet, the whole point of the program is to kind of get you there. So I think you have to kind of be confident in yourself and do the research. And I think as well, it's also fine to not be sure if it's for you, especially in year 12 or at that stage. And that also is completely normal and completely fine. And I think there's just a little bit of research, kind of attending events like this that kind of give you that insight, which make it helpful to kind of make that decision. But it is also perfectly fine to not be certain as of yet either.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap it up here, and we're kind of post time as well. So thank you so very much to Kevin, to Summer, and to Tyrese. I think this has been fantastically insightful for the students and also for me as a non-lawyer. So I'll take a lot of this advice and give it during our in-person event. So thank you very much for that. We really appreciate it. And thank you so much to everyone who attended this webinar as well. I hope you found it insightful. I'm aware that we haven't gotten to answer all of the questions. So if you still have not received an answer to your question, please do feel free to email me. And I can sort of pass it on either to the panelists, or if I know the answer, I can sort of answer it as well. So I've put my email on the chat box that hopefully you can all see. And I've also put a link to the Exploring Legal Futures webinar series on the faculty website. We do have another 2 webinars upcoming. One of them is about being a lawyer without having done a law degree and what people's experiences of that. And then the last webinar is about doing a law degree, but then deciding not to become a lawyer. So if this session has convinced you that law is not for you, we've got a webinar for you as well. But hopefully it has not. So thank you so very much for coming. Hopefully we will see you next week. Otherwise, have a lovely evening and a lovely rest of your week as well. A lovely rest of your week as well. Bye.